Mr Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this free trade second reading bill with Malaysia. And I'd particularly like to begin by thanking colleagues in the Select Committee for the good work that we do in a very collegial way, particularly Marion Street and Pete Hodson, Keith Locke and my colleagues, my national colleagues, some of whom are in the House tonight. And I should also like to congratulate our Ministers Phil Goff and Tim Grosser for leading the work that has been done, and while we're in thank you mode, Vitalis Vangalis from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who was the lead negotiator, did an excellent job. Mr Speaker, when I listened to the last speaker and the Green colleague speaking on the previous China free trade agreement, the one thing that really demonstrates, I think, above all else, that these agreements are worthwhile is that in the year to April 2010, that's April 2-3 months ago, our trade with China increased by $860 million over that 12-month period. Our trade to China, our exports to China, increased by $860 million. That's about the size of our total exports to Indonesia. So the China Free Trade Agreement gave us effectively another market the size of Indonesia. We're not going to get that with this Malaysian agreement, but because we're operating on a different scale. Malaysia's slightly bigger land area than ourselves. We've got similarity. We've both been British colonies. They've got a population of about 26 million. We're probably smaller than Kuala Lumpur with about 4.3. 87% in New Zealand live in urban communities, and that drift from rural to urban is growing about 1% a year. In Malaysia, about 70% of people live in towns, and that drift is about 3% a year. Importantly for the business community, both of us have got legal systems based on English common law. Quite a big difference in GDP per capita. New Zealand's sitting on around 28,000, growing at around 2%. Malaysia's sitting on 15,400 US per capita, which is growing at about 4.6%. I think that there's another very interesting statistic, and it's around internet users. Of Malaysia's population of 26 million people, 17 million are using the internet. We have a rather smaller proportion of our population, 3 million, using internet. So the Malaysians are ranked for internet usage at 22nd in the world. We're at 58th. Mr Speaker, I think that this piece of legislation puts both economies in much more balance, but still we've got 1/6 of Malaysia's population. So when we considered this bill in our Select Committee, I think that we came to the conclusion collectively that one of the reasons for signing this agreement is because we all in this Parliament want to see a boosting of innovation, and we want to see improved export access to world markets, because it's those two things that are going to give us the step change in our own economic performance, and everybody will benefit from that. This agreement with Malaysia is a very important part of National's focus on free trade and improving access for our exporters to world markets. And it was a priority included in the Prime Minister's statement to Parliament in February of this year. Only by lifting economic performance can we create jobs, boost incomes, improve living standards and provide world-class public services that our New Zealand families need. We've heard from the previous speaker about our trade figures, and I would just reiterate that over the past 4 years, New Zealand goods exports to Malaysia grew by more than 50%, making Malaysia New Zealand's 10th largest trading partner. And I think that those things are going to bode well for the future. But, Mr. Speaker, the real driver is going to hit the pockets of kiwi fruit farmers, because at the moment we're paying 15% tariff on every kiwi fruit exported into Malaysia. 2012, that'll become duty-free. And based on the most recent trade figures, our kiwi fruit exports to Malaysia have grown by 173% since 2007. As my colleague Marion Street said, meat, wool, dairy, excluding liquid milk, fish forestry products are bound in, so Malaysia cannot reapply tariffs on New Zealand agricultural exports. Very important in my electorate. Liquid milk has a significant improvement on in-quota duties, which will be eliminated, and in-quota volumes, which will increase up to 5% a year. Mr. Speaker, the Malaysian FTA includes an agreement to establish mechanisms that allow for the recognition of the equivalency of each other's qualifications. So this will improve New Zealand's professional service suppliers' ability to deliver services in Malaysia. So that's people like architects and insurance companies. New Zealand provides access duty-free for about 72% of imports from Malaysia, and under the FTA this is going to increase to 90.8% this year, graduating to 100% by 2016. There was only one area of this agreement that I felt could have been more rigorously negotiated, and that was in the area of company ownership. Any Malaysian company is allowed to buy 100% of a New Zealand company, and Opus Construction would be a very good example of that. But the Malaysians have only given us the capacity to buy 70% of a Malaysian company. I think that as we look into the future and in other free trade agreements, we could think about a greater principle of reciprocity, and that was something that was acknowledged by the committee. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, it's very pleasing to be able to bring this piece of legislation back to the House without any amendment, and I commend it to the House for passing. Thank you.